So, am I audible now? Okay, I got a signal. So, I think it is working now. Am I audible now? Okay, good. Good. Actually, I just wanted to confirm whether I'm audible or not for a long time, but because I was not audible at all, so you could not give me any signal. So anyways, the problem has been sorted and everything is fine now. So let us start the session now. So just I said that in the last session we discussed some very interesting sets of critical reasoning statements where we tried to analyze those statements, and I hope that we have learned quite a few things from those statements, and now we understand how to deal with the critical reasoning statements. And in this session today, I have brought two very interesting sets of RCs. One is dealing with the science, basically geology part of the science, and the other RC set is dealing with the art and culture section. So we'll be getting an idea how to deal with these different genres, and these two RCs will teach you a lot of things. So RCs about, see, there is nothing particular and concrete about the RCs. All the RCs have to be dealt in a particular way depending on the RC only. And we'll learn how to handle a RC and what are the key issues that we need to notice, and how to handle the nuances of the RCs with two interesting sets. And after these two RCs, I have also brought some statements of critical reasoning, and we'll be analyzing those statements and try to come up with the most accurate response as we go along. So let us start with the RC, and the way I'm going to conduct this session is that first I'll let you read the RC. You have ample amount of time. In the last session also I said that there are basically two very important things. One is speed and the other is accuracy. But initially we'll be focusing on the accuracy part, and speed is something that comes along with time. So you just keep practicing RC sets, you keep practicing critical reasoning questions, and your speed part will be taken care of automatically. You don't need to worry about it a lot in the initial stage of your preparation. But yes, you have to focus on the accuracy part, that how to analyze the RC, how to read the statements, how to make the conclusion, how to understand the main idea, how to define supporting idea. So these things we'll be learning in the initial stage. So I'll let you read the RC on your own, and I'll give you ample amount of time. Just read the RC, get the feel of it, and come up with your opinion about it. That how do you feel, whether the RC is very tricky or it is moderate or it is easy. What is your opinion? What opinion do you form about it? You can come up with that. So I'll let you read the RC. Let us start now. So here is the RC. It is the passage and it is about geology. So basically genre is science and technology. And so now I will just let you read. And once you are done with your reading, you just let me know that you are done, and then I'll start talking about the passage. So if you are good to go, give me a signal. Are you able to read this? No, this is not for CAT, it is for GMAT basically. But if we talk about the RC and the difficulty level, there is no distinction at all. There is no difference. So RC level is same as CAT. So if you have to practice RC, whether you do it for GMAT or you do it for CAT, there is no difference at all. Once you are done with the reading, please let me know. Well, I think that some of you might already find it to be a very difficult set. Is it so? How many of you are very comfortable while reading this? And how many of you think that it is very tricky? So how would you rate this set, this passage? Is this a tricky passage, a moderate one, or an easy one? Are you done with the reading part? Should I start? I also want your responses. I also waiting for your opinion. That how many of you think that this passage is very easy, and how many of you think that it is very tricky? Because that will develop an understanding. We actually need to realize and the difficulty level, and we actually need to form an opinion about these passages. Satyam. So Satyam has come up with a response and he thinks that it is very difficult for him. What about others? Because once we have these kind of opinions, only then we can understand what we actually need to do in order to crack these RCs. So see, the passage is actually very tricky. There is no doubt about it. And what makes this passage tricky is the technical part. It deals with a very specific subject matter, basically geology, or you can call it, some people call it oceanography. So it is talking about the formation of ocean basins, that how these ocean basins came to existence and how they work, how they function. So it becomes a very technical subject, and only the students who have got some background knowledge of the given topic, of the given subject, will be comfortable while reading this. But is it possible for each of us to be very familiar with the subject matter? Because this RC set is dealing with one particular subject matter. There would be other RCs that would be dealing with some other subject matter. And is it possible for us to be master of all subject matters? I don't think so. So what is required in these cases is not that we be master of all these arts, of all these genres. It is only a good manager is only like being a jack of all arts, jack of many arts. So you have to know a little about many fields. And when we deal with the RC, we are basically, we dwell in the world of dealing with words only. But don't read this like that some random words have been scattered on the sheet, on the paper, and you have to make sense of it. Try to look at the passages from the knowledge point of view, that this is a set, this is a passage, it is talking about something, and don't look at this from the linguistic angle only. Also try to dwell in the knowledge part of this passage, that you want to learn something, you want to know a few things about whatever field is being discussed here. So let me read this for you. That no very satisfactory account of the mechanism that caused the formation of the ocean basins has yet been given. Now, when we talk about the main idea, let me select a pen. When we talk about the main idea, we get main idea. You have to derive the main idea, but before that, you need to understand the subject matter which is being discussed. So main idea comes only after you understand the subject matter which is being discussed. So the first question that you should ask while dealing with a passage is that what is the subject matter? What is the subject matter which is being discussed here? That is the first question that should come to your mind while dealing with any kind of passage. While dealing with any passage, if you don't get this, you won't be able to comprehend the passage at all. So what is the subject matter? And in 99% cases, but I'll write 95 only. In 95 to 99% cases, you get the subject matter in the first sentence itself. It is not the case always, but it is the case in majority. That only in the first sentence you get the subject matter which is going to be discussed here. So not very satisfactory account of the mechanism. So the subject matter is this actually. Mechanism that caused the formation of the ocean basins. This is the subject matter which is being discussed here. And he is going to continue in the same line, in the same vein. And when we read further, you have read it, so you might have realized that mechanism that caused the formation of the ocean basins is the subject matter which is being discussed here. And what do we do when we have to talk about something? We have opinions, we express these opinions. So authors do the same thing. And he has actually given his opinion in the first statement itself, that he believes, the author thinks that not very satisfactory accounts of the mechanism are present. So he believes that the reasons behind formation of ocean basins actually are not very satisfactory. That is his opinion. And you got this subject matter in the first sentence itself. Mechanism that caused the formation of ocean basins is being discussed here. And according to the author, this account of this formation is not very satisfactory. And what is that mechanism? What is the traditional view? The traditional view supposes that the upper mantle of the earth behaves as a liquid when it is subject to a small force for long periods, and that differences in temperature under oceans and continents are sufficient to produce convection in mantle of the earth with rising convection currents along as though they were on a conveyor belt and would provide the forces needed to produce the split that occurs along the ridge. Now, it contains a lot of technical words. For example, only students who have dealt with science would understand this word convection. And there is word this ridge, oceanography again. So a person who has studied geography would understand what is ridge. A person who has studied a little bit of science would understand what is the convection. So these are not just tricky words, these are entire ideas. And is it possible for us to know all the ideas present in the passage? I don't think so. So it is very difficult to be familiar with all these ideas which are presented here. But what we need to do is that we need to understand what is being discussed here. So this mechanism is being discussed here. And then there is a traditional view. This is the traditional view. So he is going to explain the traditional view behind in the formation of this ocean basins. And now he is going to describe the traditional view. At least we need to understand this part. So I am circling the part that we need to understand here. And now if we continue reading, theoretically, this is his opinion, that theoretically this convection would carry the continental plates along as though they were on a conveyor belt and would provide the forces needed to produce a split that occurs along the ridge. This view may be correct, this view, this traditional view, अब देखो, we might not have understood the view properly. We might not have understood the view properly, but we need to understand the author is saying that this view may be correct. So not very satisfactory, but may be correct. How? He is going to define this, that how it may be correct. That it has the advantage that the currents are driven by temperature differences that themselves depend on the position of the continents. Such a back coupling in which position of the moving plate has an impact on the forces that move it could produce complicated and varying motions. So again, technicality. So this is the technical part, but this is the part that we need to understand as a reader. So as a reader, we need to understand only this, and then the traditional view is being discussed. Whatever that traditional view, we might not have been able to understand that, and this view, this traditional view may be correct. So this is the content of the first passage, first paragraph. And then in the second paragraph, he says, on the other hand, the theory is implausible. Now we need to understand this word implausible. Implausible is actually irrational. So first he said that it may be correct, and then he says that it may not be correct. It could be implausible. Implausible is unreasonable, irrational. So on the other hand, the theory is implausible because convection does not normally occur along lines, and it certainly does not occur along lines broken by frequent offsets of charges in direction, as the ridge is. Also, it is difficult to see how the theory applies to the plate between the mid-Atlantic ridge and the ridge in the Indian Ocean. This plate is growing on both sides, and since there is no intermediate trench, this is again a technical word, trench, the two ridges must be moving apart. It would be odd if the rising convection current kept exact pace with them. An alternative theory is that, now it is talking about an alternative theory, that how it could be correct. So an alternative theory is that the sinking part of the plate, which is denser than the hotter surrounding mantle, pulls the rest of the plate after it. Again, it is difficult to see, and again it is difficult to see. So he provided an alternative theory, and now he is going to counter that alternative theory as well, by saying that again it is difficult to see how this applies to the ridge in the South Atlantic, where neither the African nor the American plate has a sinking part. And now let me be very honest to you, that we do not need to understand all the details, all the technical part of the passage. We only need to understand what the author is actually trying to say, because sometimes it is not possible to understand all the technical details, and this passage is very technical, it is very tricky, and you might not be familiar with these things that he is discussing. But what he is trying to say, this is what we need to understand. There is a meme on the Facebook everywhere. A character comes and he says that, कहना क्या चाहते हो भाई? So we just need to understand, कहना क्या चाहते हो? That's it. What is being discussed here, at least we need to understand that. We may not be able to comprehend all the technical parts, but what is being discussed, that is what we need to understand. Now the final passage, the final paragraph. Another possibility is that the sinking plate cools the neighboring mantle and produces convection current that move the plate. This last theory now is talking about another theory, another possibility. So this is the traditional view. This is the traditional view behind the formation. Traditional view behind the formation of the mechanism that caused the formation of the ocean basins. So first he said this view may be correct, but then he is like, this may not be correct. But then he's like, people say, people produce alternative theory to prove that this is correct. So he is basically talking about the validity of this traditional view, that how valid this traditional view is behind the formation of ocean basins. So he starts with this final paragraph. Another possibility is that the sinking plate cools the neighboring mantle and produces convection currents that move the plates. This last theory is attractive because it gives some hope of explaining the enclosed seas, such as the Sea of Japan. These seas have a typical oceanic floor, except that the floor is overlaid by several kilometers of sediments. Again, a technical word. You might not understand what a sediment is. So, their floors have probably been sinking for long periods. It seems possible that a sinking current of closed mantle material on the upper side of the plate might be the cause of such deep basins. The enclosed seas are an important features of the Earth's surface and seriously require explanation in because addition to the enclosed seas that are developing at present behind island arcs, there are a number of older ones of possibly similar origins such as the Gulf of Mexico, the Black Sea and perhaps the North Sea. So this passage is almost a nightmare. So I would say that this passage is actually a nightmare and it is very difficult to comprehend the content of the passage. But whenever this is the case, whenever they deal with the very technical RC, technical subject matter, questions are going to be easy. That is the general case. That is what I have observed throughout the years. That when the passage is like this, questions are easy or they are at least doable. Because if the question would be based on the technical part of this passage, almost no one would be able to answer those questions, or very few people will be able to answer that question. So now let's move to the question. And now you might think that this is very difficult passage, but look, I don't think that questions are very difficult. Questions are very easy actually. You only need to understand what has been discussed and you will be able to answer these kind of questions. So I believe, I'm under the impression that not most of you would have understood the content very well because it is very technical. But you just have to understand what is being discussed and then I think you can answer most of the questions. So the first question is, according to the traditional view of the origin of the ocean basins, which of the following is sufficient to move the continental plates? Now, you don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to be a scientist to answer this because this technical thing is being discussed here. And now because you have read it, what do you think is the answer? Which of these have been mentioned in the passage? What should be the answer to this question? The passage was difficult, but not the questions. These questions are very much doable. Which answer would you pick? And now actually you don't even need to go and read the passage again. If you have read it carefully, you can simply answer it without going back to the passage. So as a reader, you only need to notice what has been discussed here. Nothing more than that. So Satyam, if you are still there, you can try to answer this question. And working with RCs is actually a very difficult task because it is arduous because most of the times the content is going to be very boring. You won't feel like reading this because we don't deal with these kind of topics in our day-to-day lives. And when we face these kind of subject matter, we get bored very easily and immediately. So that is very common in dealing with the passages. So see, option 1 is talking about the increases in sedimentation on the ocean floors. If you try to look at this from the technical angle, you will get confused. But if you simply read this and notice what has been discussed, so the reason behind the formation of ocean basins, this is being discussed here, and driven by temperature differences. It is clearly mentioned here, and that's why the answer would be E, that differences in temperature under oceans and continents This is the traditional view of the origin of the basins. So here we got the traditional view, and this is the traditional view, that they are being formed, these ocean basins are being formed because of the temperature differences between oceans and the continents. So because of that temperature difference, we have got a current, and that makes a shift in the basin. And a sinking of the ocean basins and this are all incorrect, and they are only a distraction. They have not been mentioned in this part. So none of the A, B, C and D is mentioned in this part. Only the difference in temperature has been mentioned, and that is the traditional view. And let's move to the next question. It can be inferred from the passage that of the following, the deepest sediment would be found in the, which of these? Indian Ocean, Black Sea, Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic or Pacific? So, answer would pick for this one. And again, it's a trick question. You won't get the answer if you delve deep into the details. Sometimes you need to be you need to deal with the details, and sometimes you need only to be superficial. And in this case, because it is very difficult to deal with the details, you only need a superficial reading and you will get the answer. So here you will get the answer in the last paragraph, in this one, because the sediment has been discussed here only. Formation of sediment and how they work, their mechanism and their geographical location. These details are given in this final paragraph, and you won't get it written very clearly and directly. But if you see that, if you read the final paragraph, you will see that Indian Ocean has not been mentioned here at all. This Mid-Atlantic Sea, this South Atlantic Sea and this Pacific, these ocean bodies have not got any mention at all here. The only mention that you will get is of Black Sea and the Gulf of Mexico and perhaps North Sea. So Gulf of Mexico, Black Sea and North Sea. Out of these three bodies, only Black Sea is present in the option. So this Gulf of Mexico and North Sea, they are not present in the option. And the other options, Indian Ocean, South Atlantic and Pacific, they have not been mentioned here. So the only possibility is Black Sea, and that is where you are very likely to find the deepest sediments. And that's why the answer is B. So it would become very tricky if you try to deal it with logically, but if you notice that the other bodies have not been mentioned here, the only body that has been mentioned is Black Sea, and that's why the only likely answer is Black Sea. Now the author refers to a conveyor belt highlighting text. The text has not been highlighted, let me highlight it for you. This is the conveyor belt. So the author refers to a conveyor belt in order to, which of these? See, now that we have understood the content of the passage, that what is being discussed here, and he refers a conveyor belt because he is only trying to explain the formation of the ocean basins, that how the plates have shifted, how the plates shift like a conveyor belt that we get at the airport and elsewhere. So he mentions conveyor belt to illustrate the effects of convection in the mantle, that how this mantle moves. This is being illustrated with this example. He is only trying to illustrate that how this mantle moves, and that is why he is giving the example of the conveyor belt. And he is not trying to show how temperature difference depend on the positions of the continent. So the position of the continent has got nothing to do with the example of conveyor belt, and demonstrate the linear nature of mid-Atlantic ridge. So mid-Atlantic ridge is here, somewhere here, and that is not defining the nature of the mid-Atlantic ridge. And D says that describe the complicated motion made by possible by back coupling. So back coupling is again mentioned very later, somewhere here, and it is not the case here. And he has mentioned the conveyor belt to account for the rising current under certain mid-ocean ridges. It is also not the answer. It is very obvious, it is mentioned here, and this is the answer. Now, the fourth question. The author regards the traditional view of the origin of the ocean with slight apprehension, absolute indifference, indignant anger, complete disbelief, or guarded skepticism. And as we have already understood that what is being discussed here and what is the view. So in the very first statement you get the answer. No very satisfactory account behind the formation of ocean basins has yet been given. So what is this? And then he says that it may be true, it may be, this view may be correct, but on the other hand it is implausible. So not very satisfactory, this may be correct, but it is implausible. So this explains everything, that the author is actually skeptical, but this skepticism is very guarded, because he is providing the counter argument as well. He is providing the alternative argument as well. So his skepticism is very guarded. He is trying to negate these accounts, but he is being very careful. So his view is very guarded, and the view is skepticism. Apprehension is like disbelief, and indifference is like not caring at all. Indifference is like when you don't feel anything about it, when you don't care about it, your attitude is indifferent. So indifferent is not present here. If he had been indifferent, he would not be discussing this point. So he is discussing this in detail, that means he is not indifferent. Indignant and anger are same thing. So he is not angry about anything, he is not indignant about anything. So this is not the attitude of the author. And complete disbelief, it is like apprehension. Apprehension is like half disbelief, and complete disbelief is complete disbelief. Apprehension is half disbelief. So there is no disbelief. So that should not be the answer. So the answer is guarded skepticism. So I would rate the passage. If I have to rate the passage on the difficulty level, I would rate it 10 on 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, the passage is actually very difficult to read. So it is 10 on 10. The content is very difficult, very difficult. But if I talk about the questions, they are actually easy. So that is what you need to understand, that only by looking at the passage, you are paranoid and you think that, oh my God, how would I do this? How can I deal with this very deep subject matter? I don't know anything about the formation of ocean. I don't understand most of the words mentioned here. I do not know what a ridge is. So look at this. I don't understand convection. I don't understand ridges. I don't understand the other technical terms which are there. I don't understand any geographical location. I don't understand how the plates move. It's okay. Even if you do not understand these things in detail, still it is possible to answer these kind of question. So passage is very difficult, questions are very easy. So that's the conclusion for the first RC. And for some of us it could be like a nightmare, because we are not in the habit of reading usually. We don't read at all, that's the problem. And even if we have to read, we read Chetan Bhagat. So that's the irony, that you are reading Chetan Bhagat all the time, but in GMAT and CAT you will get subject matters like this, very boring. No one wants to read stuff like this, because this has got to do nothing with your life, and you don't find any pleasure in reading these things, and that becomes a problem. So if you have to attempt GMAT or CAT, you have to be serious, and you have to develop a habit of reading these kind of topics, otherwise it is impossible. And the source where you can find these kind of topic is a very famous website. Why it is famous? Because it is free. So Eon essays. So on Eon essays you will be getting topics like this and many others. Basically philosophy and psychology and art and culture are discussed there in detail. And in CAD and GMAT you get content like that only. So if you want to develop this habit, you can refer to the Eon essays. It is free and very excellent. So that is for developing a habit of reading this heavy stuff. Other than that, you will be getting RCs in these classrooms, and we'll be doing lot of passages like this only. And for those who wonder that does the GMAT ask passages like this, so let me reveal that it is actual GMAT passage. So this is actual GMAT passage from the past. Now, this is the next passage that I have here, and this is not like the last one. The last passage, see, one more thing that you need to understand, that some passages deal with very specific issues. Why the questions were easy? Because the questions will deal with, sometimes they deal with main idea. If the question is dealing with the main idea, you need a holistic understanding of the passage. But sometimes the questions deal with specific details. When the question is dealing with a specific detail, you don't need to understand the entire passage. That is not required. But when the question deals with main idea, a holistic understanding of the passage is required. So these two passages that I have brought today are very different in their nature. The first passage that we have just done was dealing majorly with the specific idea questions. They were dealing with specific details only. For example, there were question on the traditional view and the author's overall view. So author's overall view is present in the first statement, traditional view is present here, and one question was dealing with the Black Sea. So these are very specific issues which are being discussed, and the other was dealing with the conveyor belt. So we got 4 questions. One is dealing with this first sentence, the other is dealing with the traditional view, the other was about the conveyor belt, and the other was about the Black Sea. So you don't need to understand the entirety. You don't need to understand this passage in entirety. Only if you notice these specific details, you will be able to answer the questions. But the next passage that we are going to do today is different from this. You have got to understand this passage in entirety, and only then you will be able to answer the questions. So here's the passage. Take your time, read this. Once you are done with the reading, just let me know, and I'll start explaining again. I hope that by now you are done with the reading. And unlike the previous passage, where we did not need to bother with the specific details, I mean all the details, technical details, here we actually need to understand the flow of the content. And only if we understand the passage in entirety, we will be able to answer the questions. Otherwise, you will see, when you will see the questions, you will realize that actually you need to understand this, that what is being discussed here. So how many of you feel that this one was easier than the previous one? Do you feel that this was easier than the last RC? Okay, so let us talk about this passage. The passage is actually about a painter named Roy Lichtenstein. So it is about Roy Lichtenstein and his art, the art form that he actually dealt in. So he's a painter, and the painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define pop art. And now if you remember the last session of critical reasoning, I said that whatever you have between the hyphen, so this is the hyphen part here, and whatever you find between this is not actual part of the sentence. So it is not going to form the actual sentence. The main frame of sentence is on the left and right side of this hyphen part. So you can read this first sentence as, the painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define pop art by paraphrasing, sorry for this, I did not want to do this. So the painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define the pop art by paraphrasing the style of comic books in his work. So that is the first sentence. Now you can see that the sentence become very simple. The painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define pop art by paraphrasing the style of comic books in his work. So he just paraphrased. All of you must understand comic books. We are familiar with the graphic novels, comic books, and he just paraphrased the style of comic books. That is your first sentence. So you can break down the complex sentence into simple one like this. This is the additional detail which is given here. This part under the hyphen is the additional information which is given. You don't need to worry about it in order to comprehend the sentence. So the first sentence becomes the painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define pop art by paraphrasing the style of comic books in his work. So he just simply paraphrased comic books, and he is basically a painter. So his merger of a popular genre with the forms and intentions of fine art. So his merger of a popular genre. So what is the popular genre here? So this popular genre is nothing but this comic books. So popular genre refers to these comic books, and he just merged these comic books with fine art. That is what you need to understand. What did this painter do? He merged comic books with fine arts, and this generated a complex result. What is the complex result? While poking fun at the pretensions of art world, so by using this word pretension, actually he is not approving the fine art world, and that's why he introduced in the world of fine art the word of comic books. So there is comic books, then there is fine art. He just merged the fine art with comic books and came up with a new kind of painting. Let me read it again. So the painter Roy Lichtenstein helped to define pop art by paraphrasing the style of comic books in his work. His merger of a popular genre, which is comic books, with the forms and intentions of fine art generated a complex result. What is that complex result? And how did he do this? While poking fun at the pretensions of fine art word, Lichtenstein's work also managed to convey a seriousness of theme that enabled it to transcend mere parody. So what is a parody? This is a key word of this passage. If you do not understand this word parody, you won't be able to understand this RC. So let us have a look at the meaning of parody, because this is the key word of this passage. Those of you who are not familiar with this parody won't be able to understand this passage at all. So what a parody is actually? It's a piece of writing, speech or music that copies the style of someone or somebody in a funny way. So if you want to understand what a parody is, those of you who have seen Game of Thrones, there was an episode where Joffrey was poisoned. Joffrey, the king, the young king, he was poisoned. And if you remember that scene when he was about to be poisoned, he was actually enjoying a parody. There were characters who were making fun of their kingdom by playing different characters. So they made fun of Ned Stark. They played Ned Stark in a funny way. Then they played the imp in a funny way. So that play that he was enjoying was an example of parody. So to present something which is very serious in a lighter way is parody. So a very serious subject matter, but you are presenting that serious subject matter by copying it, by imitating it in a very light way, in a very humorous way. That is the example of parody. So this is what he is doing with the fine art. So he is presenting the fine art in a humorous way, in a funny way, in the form of comics. So that is what this painter is doing actually. Fine art represents seriousness, and to that seriousness he calls pretentious seriousness. The author is writing for pretentious for their seriousness. So that seriousness in the fine art was pretentious, and he is making it a parody by presenting the fine art in a comical way. So that's what parody is. So read this again, this sentence again, that Lichtenstein's work also managed to convey a seriousness of theme that enabled it to transcend mere parody. So his work was not mere parody. It was not mere parody. It was something deeper. It was something more. That Lichtenstein's images were fine art was at first difficult to see. That means people did not realize that his work was actually an example of fine art. So people did not put his work under fine art because it was more like comics. So that Lichtenstein's images were fine art was at first difficult to see because with their word balloons and highly stylized figure, they looked like nothing more than the comic book panels from which they were copied. So people simply thought that his works are comics. Standard art history holds that pop art images, from here, I'm reading it from here. Standard art history holds that pop art emerged as an impersonal alternative to the histrionics of abstract expressionism. Now again, abstract expressionism. This word refers to the fine art. The fine art that was available, that was in fashion at that time, has been referred to as abstract expressionism. अब एब्स्ट्रैक्ट एक्सप्रेशनिज्म क्या होता है मैं हिंदी में समझा देता हूँ. आपने आर्ट्स को प्रेज करने वाले लोगों को देखा होगा कि वाओ व्हाट अ ब्यूटी, व्हाट एन आर्ट, व्हाट अ पीस ऑफ आर्ट. तो बट वो आर्ट क्या होता है जब आप स्क्रीन पे देखते हो कि आप बस रैंडम कोई इंक ले लो अपने हाथ में, ब्लू, येलो, रेड और मल्टीपल कलर्स, एंड यू जस्ट थ्रो दैट इंक ऑन द वॉल, इट टेक्स अ शेप एंड यू कॉल इट अ पेंटिंग. सो दैट इज एब्स्ट्रैक्ट form of painting, abstract expressionism. So abstract is something not very concrete, intangible. So you take some ink, throw it on the screen, it becomes a painting. That is abstract expressionism. And then you are very serious about that painting. Oh, wow, what an art, what a beauty. So he just, this painter, Lichtenstein, Roy Lichtenstein, He just thought that this seriousness in that abstract expressionism was not required. So he kind of mocked it. In a way, he was mocking the abstract expressionism. A moment in which painters conveyed their private attitudes and emotions using non-representational techniques. The truth is that by the time pop art first appeared in the early 1960s, abstract expressionism had already lost much of its force. This abstract expressionism had already lost much of its force. Pop art painters weren't quarreling with the powerful early abstract expressionists. So they were not quarreling with the powerful early abstract expressionists of late 1940s, but with the second generation of abstract expressionists whose work seemed airy, high-minded, and overly lyrical. So he is being derogatory. He is being derogatory about the second generation of fine artists. Here, Roy Lichtenstein was actually derogatory about the second generation of the fine artists that came up in the 1960s actually. And reading from here. No, not from here. Pop art paintings were full of simple black lines and large areas of primary color. Lichtenstein's work was part of a general rebellion against the fading emotional power of abstract expressionism rather than an aloof attempt to ignore it. So it was not a simple attempt to ignore it, rather he was dwelling in it, and it was a rebellion against the latter part of abstract expressionism. So he was not against the initial stage of abstract expressionism. He was against the latter stage of abstract expressionism. The final paragraph. But if rebellion against previous art by means of the careful imitation of a popular genre, and that popular genre is again comics. So, but if rebellion against previous art by means of the careful imitation of a popular genre were all that characterized Lichtenstein's work, it would possess only the reflective power that parodies have in relation to their subjects. Beneath its cartoonish methods, his work displayed an impulse towards realism, an urge to say that what was missing from contemporary painting was the depiction of contemporary life. So, this contemporary life, Ray Lichtenstein believed that in their fine art form, the contemporary life element was missing actually. This depiction of contemporary life was missing in their works. The stilted romances and war stories portrayed in the comic books on which he based his canvases, his canvases, the stylized automobiles, hot dogs, and table lamps that appeared in his pictures were reflections of the culture Lichtenstein inhabited. So, unlike the fine artists, so in the works of fine artists, the depiction of contemporary life was missing. So, contemporary life was not being presented by those fine artists, and in his works, in his paintings, which was an imitation of cartoons, he tried to incorporate that element of contemporary life. He just wanted to represent the contemporary life through his paintings by imitating those comic works. But in contrast to some pop art, Lichtenstein's work exuded not a jaded cynicism about consumer culture, but a kind of deliberate naivety, intended as a response to the excess of sophistication he observed not only in the latter abstract expressionists. So look at this. Sophistication he observed not only in the latter abstract expressionists, but in some other pop artists as well. And he did not like this, and that is why he came up with his own form of painting, and he revolutionized the pop art culture. With comics, typically the domain of youth and innocence. As his reference point, a nostalgia fills his paintings that gives them, for all their surface bravado, an inner sweetness. His persistent use of comic art conventions demonstrates a faith in reconciliation not only between cartoons and fine art, but between parody and true feeling. So he just infused parody with true feelings. So prior to him, people thought that parody does not represent true feeling, it lacks seriousness. But what he did, he just revolutionized this idea and he added feelings in the parody and in the form of painting. So again, if you talk about the subject matter of this passage, it is again not easy to understand and not most of us would be able to comprehend these kind of subject matters. And again, if you ask me, is it an easy reading? No, it is not an easy reading, it is a difficult one. And now, let's come to the question. So this is the first question. Which of the following most accurately states the main point of the passage? See, unlike the previous passage where only specific details would be enough to answer the question, here it is not the case. Here a holistic understanding of the passage is required in order to answer this question. That which of the following is actually the main point of the passage. So if I have to explain, which I have already done, that Lichtenstein popularized or revolutionized the pop art. He was a painter. He was not very happy with the missing element of contemporary life in the works of fine artists. So he was not happy with the latter fine artists. Why? Because they did not represent the contemporary life. They were very pompous in their style and they were extra sophisticated, and that's why he did not like this form of art, and he introduced comics in his painting. So basically comics ही बनाता था ये. तो अब देखो थोड़ा हिंदी में समझाता हूँ because some of you might not be very comfortable in understanding in English. So ये क्या कर रहा है इसने कि जो फाइन आर्टिस्ट थे उनके अप्रोच से हैप्पी नहीं था, क्योंकि ही बिलीव्ड कि वो रिप्रेजेंट नहीं करते अपने आसपास के समाज को, अपने समसामयिक जीवन को वो रिप्रेजेंट नहीं करते हैं जो फाइन आर्टिस्ट हैं. तो इसने उसको करने के लिए हाउ ही डिड दिस, कार्टूनिस्ट होते हैं वो कार्टून बनाते हैं. ही वॉज अ पेंटर बट ही ड्रू कार्टून्स, बेसिकली कार्टून की पेंटिंग ही बनाते थे. और ये इनका आर्ट फॉर्म था, कार्टून ना बना के कार्टून्स की पेंटिंग्स बनाना. अब कार्टून की पेंटिंग बनाते थे तो बहुत लोग इन्हें कार्टूनिस्ट समझते थे, बट एक्चुअली ही वॉज एन आर्टिस्ट नॉट ए कार्टूनिस्ट. सो सम पीपल वर कन्फ्यूज्ड कि ये कर क्या रहा है, इज ही ए कार्टूनिस्ट और इज ही एन आर्टिस्ट. सो ही वॉज अ पेंटर, ही वॉज एन आर्टिस्ट एंड ही वॉज इमिटेटिंग कार्टून्स, उस फॉर्म में बनाते थे. एंड दिस वॉज द कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन बिटवीन फाइन आर्टिस्ट एंड पॉप कल्चर आर्टिस्ट्स. सो फाइन आर्ट्स एंड पॉप आर्ट्स, इसी के कंपैरिजन को किया गया है. एंड द पेंटर रॉयल लिस्टेनस्टीन, he defined pop art. How? By paraphrasing the style of comic books. So he just copied. Paraphrasing is like presenting something in different words. So he was paraphrasing the comic books. And now, which of the following most accurately states the main point of the passage? A says that Lichtenstein's use of comic book elements in his paintings considered simply a parodic reaction to the high-mindedness of later abstract expressionism is also an attempt to recreate the emotionally powerful work of earlier abstract expressionists. So you have to analyze these options, which are quite lengthy, and it is if you are looking for something which is easy in GMAT or CAT, you won't be getting this very often. There is no such thing as easy in GMAT or CAT. So, and it is not going to be entertaining, let me tell you, that you won't be entertained by it all the time, because it is a very deep subject matter. It is going to be like this only. And if you don't learn how to deal with these difficult and deep subject matters, I mean, there will be sufferings on your way. So this is the first option which we have just read, and let me analyze this. That Lichtenstein's use of comic book elements in his paintings considered simply a parody. So it was considered, his work was considered simply a parodic reaction. So was his work simply a parodic reaction to the high mindedness. अब देखो parodic reaction नहीं समझ में आएगा आपको, क्यों? अगर parody नहीं समझ में आएगी तो इसीलिए parody को मैंने पहले ही समझा दिया. What is parody? Parody is to represent something serious in a very lighter way, on a lighter note. So was his work, was Lichtenstein's work was considered simply a parodic reaction to the high-mindedness of later abstract expressionism. So this later abstract expressionism is the later fine artists. So his work was a reaction and only and simply a parodic reaction to the later expressionism. Is it the case? No, it is not the case, because here we have understood clearly that it was not merely a parody. It was something deeper. It enabled it to transcend into something deeper, not just mere parody. So this statement, this option is saying that Lichtenstein's work was simply a parodic reaction. But no, it was not mere parody. It was not mere parody. It was more than that. It was deeper than that. So this can't be the answer. 2. B says that Lichtenstein's use of comic book elements is not solely a parodic reaction. Look at this. यही कह रहा था मैं इतनी देर से. A को क्यों remove किया? Why A can't be the answer? Because it was not merely a parodic reaction. It was more than that. So Lichtenstein's use of comic book elements is not solely a parodic reaction to high-mindedness of later expressionism, but also demonstrate an attempt to achieve realistic and nostalgic effects simultaneously in his painting. So look at this nostalgia and realism. You can find this part here in this part, where it was talking about nostalgia and realistic element, somewhere in this third paragraph. Look at this. You will find nostalgia here. So you see that you have to take reference from this part as well as from this part, and then you get the complete answer. So a holistic understanding of this passage is required actually. That is why I said this in the beginning. So yes, B is correct, and it is the answer that Lichtenstein's work was not merely a parodic reaction to the later expressionism, abstract expressionism. It was more than a parodic reaction. He just wanted to represent the contemporary society by his work, in his works. Now let us move to the next question. Which of the following best captures the author's attitude towards Lichtenstein's work? So we have understood the work of Lichtenstein. This is what we have already understood. But how could we do that? How we were able to understand Lichtenstein's work? Because the author has explained his work, and only through the words of author were we able to understand Lichtenstein's work. And now the question is about the author's attitude towards Lichtenstein's work. So what is his attitude? So does the author reflect enthusiasm, or he reflects respect, or he reflects pleasure, or he reflects admiration, or he reflects appreciation? So these are the keywords. So author is talking about the work of Lichtenstein in such a language by saying this much. But his words, his discussion, does it reflect the enthusiasm of the author for its more rebellious aspects? That wow, he came up with something revolutionary and rebellious. So wow, and I'm amazed. So is the author talking in this tone? No, I don't think so. So the author's tone does not reflect any kind of enthusiasm. So A should not be the answer. And is he revering Lichtenstein that बहुत महान था, बहुत ग्रेट था, बहुत ही अच्छा था और इसके पहले ऐसा कोई नहीं हुआ, तो रेस्पेक्ट फॉर इज सबसे पेरिबेरी ऑफ यूथ एंड इनोसेंट? नहीं, ऐसा कोई कुछ नहीं है. रिस्पेक्ट वगैरह भी बहुत ज़्यादा कोई रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं कर रहा है. प्लेजर की बड़ा खुश है वो इन इट्स ब्लेटेंट रिजेक्शन ऑफ एब्स्ट्रैक्ट. वो बहुत प्लेजर महसूस कर रहा है कि लिस्टेनस्टीन ने क्या कर दिया. he blatantly rejected abstract expressionism. So I'm the author, and I'm very happy that Lichtenstein blatantly rejected the abstract expressionism. So is it the tone of the author? No, it is not the tone of the author. He is not enthusiastic. He is not expressing his respect for his work, and he is not feeling any kind of pleasure that he blatantly rejected the abstract expression. Is he admiring? So if he is not respecting, so he is not admiring as well. He is not admiring for his subtle critique of contemporary culture. Plus, this statement is incorrect because Lichtenstein never criticized contemporary culture. He criticized the contemporary fine arts. Why? Because it did not reflect, it did not represent the contemporary culture. The fine arts did not represent the contemporary culture, and that is why Lichtenstein criticized the fine art form. So this statement is incorrect actually, plus there is no admiration in the tone of the author. So this is not the answer. But is he appreciating Lichtenstein's work? Yes, he is appreciating Lichtenstein's work. Why? Because of its ability to incorporate both realism and naivety. So realism and naivety, I think this is present somewhere here. But you don't actually need to go back to the passage in order to answer this question. So this deliberate naivety. So he added this deliberate naivety in his work, and for which the author is actually appreciating it. Realism is like depiction of contemporary life. So depiction of contemporary life represents the realism part, and naivety is clearly mentioned here. So Lichtenstein was somehow able to infuse contemporary life and a deliberate naivety in his work, in his works, in his art, and that is why the author is appreciating Lichtenstein for that. So in author's tone, you won't find any enthusiasm, any respect, any pleasure, or any admiration, but yes, you will find an appreciation which is for his ability to incorporate realism and naivety in his work. So that's why this is the answer. And like I said, that if you are expecting something which is very, and now if you are expecting something very interesting, and you will always be like disappointed, because these RCs are dull, and dealing with these RCs is not easy if you are not in the habit of dealing with these abstract subject matters. So you need to develop a habit of dealing with these kind of subject matters. Now to the next question. It is like, based on the passage, which one of the following would be an example of pop art that is most in keeping with the spirit of Lichtenstein's work? So now we have understood Lichtenstein's work, his form of art, and which of these represents his form of artwork. Lichtenstein's work is being reflected. His work, his form of art is being reflected in which one of these? Oh, sorry, Harshit. So I was explaining this that now I think I am audible now. So a painting that uses realistic technique to represent several simple objects arranged on a table. So if I arrange simple objects on a table and I make a painting of those objects, do I represent the work of Liechtenstein? No, I don't, because that does not include the incorporation of contemporary society. So if you want to make a work, make a painting which is like the painting of Liechtenstein, you need to represent the society, contemporary society. So the emphasis has been put on this element in the passage, so not here. And a painting that parodies human figures by depicting them as stick figures, actually again it fails to incorporate the basic element of Liechtenstein's work. A painting that conveys its creator's inner turmoil through the use of bold lines and primary colors, again this is not the case, because bold lines and primary colors are the characteristic of Liechtenstein's work, but to represent the inner turmoil of the creator is not his target, is not his motive. So you don't want to represent your inner turmoil by using very bold lines and primary colors to just represent your inner turmoil. This was being done not by Liechtenstein but by the these expressionists, abstract expressionists. They were doing this thing. So if you make something like this, you will be representing abstract expressionists, not Liechtenstein. A painting that employs vague shapes and images to make a statement about consumer culture. So he did not use vague shapes, he used very bold shapes. He used very bold and clear shapes, not vague shapes. So if I make something which is a vague representation of images to make a statement about consumer culture, so I am not representing Liechtenstein, because he was not vague, he was very bold. And E says that a painting that depicts products as they appear in magazine advertisements to comment on society's values. Look at this, this is the part. To comment on society's values. This was the emphasis in Liechtenstein's work. In his work, he actually tried to represent the social values, the society, the contemporary society. And only this painting, only this work represents the social values, the society's values. It is representing them only and not the other paintings. So if I have to make a painting which resembles in its spirit with the works of Liechtenstein, I have to represent the social values and I have to be very bold also. Plus he was a believer in consumerism. So a painting that depicts products as they appear in magazine advertisements to comment on society's values. And why magazine advertisements? Because he used cartoons. So if I have to use cartoons by representing social values, this work would resemble the work of Liechtenstein. So I hope you got the point why E is the answer. Now, this question. Which of the following, if true, would most challenge the author's characterization of Liechtenstein? So the author has characterized Liechtenstein. Now we understand and we know what kind of an artist Liechtenstein was. Why? Because the author has told us. The author has told us that what kind of artist this painter Liechtenstein was. So he basically made parodies. Parodies, like he was copying the comic books. But he was not making comics, he was making paintings in the form of comics. And he was against the fine artists of that time, of late 1960s. So he was not happy with the fine artists' work because he felt that they failed to represent the contemporary society. Plus they are very pompous, they are very pretentious in their work. So he was a critic of fine artists of that era. So he came up with his own style of painting. So this is what we have already understood about Liechtenstein. Now, which of the following A, B, C, D and E, if we have to consider all these statements to be true, you have to consider that this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true. Everything is true. And if it is true, it would damage, it would undermine the characterization of Liechtenstein. That means it will contradict the characterization. The kind of person he is known to be would be questioned if which one of these is true. So A says that Liechtenstein frequently attended exhibitions by abstract expressionist painters in the 1960s. Look at this. This is a very good question and some of you might get confused by this. A seems like a very probable answer. You might want to just go with A simply. But see, wait, you have to pick the best. So A says if he was a critic of abstract expressionists, why would he attend exhibitions by them? So if I do not like something, if I say that I do not like Kangana Ranaut and I go and watch all of her movies, so you might question me that if you don't like it, why are you watching her movies? But you have to realize that actually in order to criticize someone, in order to be a critic of something, you need to understand it properly. You need to be familiar with it. Only then you will be able to criticize that part. So अगर मैंने कंगना रनौत की कोई पिक्चर नहीं देखी है, मैं कैसे बोलूँगा कि उसकी पिक्चर अच्छी नहीं है? मैंने देखी होंगी सारी, तभी तो मैं बोलूँगा कि उसकी कोई फिल्म अच्छी नहीं है. So if Liechtenstein attends exhibitions by abstract expressionists, it's okay. It's not a problem. Let him do that. Only then he will be able to criticize them. So this is, it is not questioning his characteristic. Liechtenstein can do this. He is allowed to do this according to the author. So don't be tricked by this. This is not the answer. And B says that Liechtenstein praised a contemporary abstract expressionist in the 1960s for producing an atypically emotional painting. Look at this. The painting is atypically emotional, not typically emotional. So though he did not like abstract expressionists in the 1960s, but he praised a contemporary expressionist for producing an atypically emotional painting. So would it be uncharacteristic of Liechtenstein? Wait. Let's read other options and then we will decide whether it could be the answer or not. Liechtenstein praised an early abstract expressionist for producing emotional paintings. This is highly a characteristic. This is not the answer, but this is highly a characteristic of Liechtenstein because he was not against the early abstract expressionists. He was against the later. Abstract expressionists for producing emotional painting. So if he praised an early abstract expressionist for producing an emotional painting, it is highly a characteristic of Liechtenstein. He can do that. So this is not the answer because it is we have to find a statement which questions this characteristic as depicted by the author. So if Liechtenstein does this, he can do this. He can do this and he can do this as well. Now talk about D. Liechtenstein criticized a pop artist in the 1960s for producing an emotional paintings. Again, it's again a highly characteristic of Liechtenstein because he criticized some of pop artists. Look at this. In this part. So not only the later abstract expressionists but also some other pop artists. So he has criticized severely the later abstract expressionists as well as some other pop artists. So he can do that. He can do this as well. And E says that Liechtenstein criticized a pop artist in the 1960s for producing paintings void of emotion. So see, Liechtenstein criticized. Now you have to analyze this B and E. So out of B and E, Harshit, which one will you pick? Because for other alternatives we have a reasoning, but out of B and E, which one would you like to pick? See, again, it is actually void of emotion. So if he wouldn't like this because he wanted to represent emotions, he wanted to represent the contemporary society as well. So Lichtenstein criticized the pop artist in the 1960s for producing a painting void of it. If he does this, he can also do this. Now again, I made a mistake here in defining this. So this, when he says some other artist, some other pop artist, he actually, this is talking about these kind of artists. This, he criticized them and some other pop artists. He criticized these kind of artists who made paintings void of emotions. So he would criticize this, not this. So we have to pick the answer from B and D actually. So out of B and out of D, we have to pick one. So here he is praising a contemporary abstract expression in the 1960s for producing an atypically emotional painting. So not the, sorry Harshit, I actually made a mistake when I said E, because when I talk about these some other pop artists, actually those pop artists are those who are making paintings void of emotions. So they are making paintings void of emotions. I realized this after reading statement E, that I got confused between D and E. So he is criticizing these kind of painters. He is criticizing these kind of pop artists who are making paintings void of emotion. So it is highly a characteristic of Lichtenstein to criticize these kind of artists. He can criticize these kind of artists. But now out of B and D. So Lichtenstein praised a contemporary abstract expressionist in the 1960s for producing an atypically, this is the key word. Had it been typically, he would criticize it. But if he is criticizing this kind of, again, he can do this because he was never in favor of abstract expressionists in the 1960s. And D says that Lichtenstein criticized a pop artist in the 1960s for producing an emotional painting. Read D and E. So if you are not supporting this, which means you are supporting this. It's a bit confusing, but you have to analyze only D and E. Let me clear the screen. Now, if you are not supporting this, if you are against this, which means you are with this, you will criticize a work which is void of emotion. You are criticizing a work which is void of emotion. That means you are supporting a work which is with emotion, which is producing emotional paintings. So here, look at this statement. He is criticizing both these things, but he can criticize only one of these two. Either he can criticize this or he can criticize this. So Lichtenstein is likely to criticize this. He would criticize this. So this is not the answer. But he would not criticize this, and that is why D is the answer. I hope the point is clear. So if Lichtenstein is criticizing a painting which is void of emotion, that means he is supporting a painting which contains emotions. And here the statement is like he criticized. So both the situation won't exist together, and that's why E is something that Lichtenstein can do, but D is something that Lichtenstein cannot do, and that's why D is our answer. We have to find that would most challenge, it would undermine his characteristic, and that's why D is the answer. So today we actually dealt with two different passages. The first one was dealing with the science, geology part, and this second passage was from art and culture, basically about not culture but yes, culture also, because he wanted to represent the culture in his arts. So we have dealt with two different genres, and you must have realized that actually these things, these subject matters are very abstract, they are very boring, and you need to develop a habit of dealing with these kind of subject matters, otherwise you will keep complaining that मेरे को आर्ट्स ही समझ में नहीं आती, क्वेश्चन समझ में नहीं आते. ये होगा शुरुआत में, बिल्कुल ही होगा. You won't be very comfortable while dealing with these things. But once you develop a habit of dealing with these boring topics, you will slowly and gradually get good at these things, And yes, this GMAT course, this entire course will be conducted by two different faculties. One is me, Anand Shukla, and the other is Abhishek sir. I'll be dealing with basically with the academic parts, and for your profile building and for any kind of assistance that you need to analyze your profile, Abhishek sir will be there constantly. So I'll be dealing with this academic part of VARC, critical reasoning, and he'll be dealing with the profile building part. So whenever you feel any kind of confusion, just feel free to contact us through YouTube, through Facebook, through any other ways of communication. You can simply give a call here at iQuanta, and 24/7 we are available for you for doubt solving, for answering your queries, be it related to academics or it is related to the profile building part. So just feel free to contact us anytime. But for now, that's all. I'll be winding up this session for now. See you next time with some more interesting RCs and critical reasoning sets. Thank you.